D&D number 3, Finding Home in Jesus' Name, Chapter 8. They arrived at the Wilsons' property to find several couples around a bonfire. Chaz drove to the far side of the lake, with Lisa following right behind in her new truck. They pulled up side by side and backed in so that the bed of Lisa's truck faced the lake. Chaz spread the thick comforter in the bed of the truck and set a cooler full of beer nearby. It wasn't quite dusk yet, and Lisa wandered down to the shoreline, lifting her skirt to keep it from getting wet. Chaz watched her play in the water. She reached down between her legs and pulled the back of her skirt through and tucked it into the front waistband, creating shorts. Then she waded out until the water passed her knees. She looked back at him, smiling. He watched her, fighting how much he wanted her. She had to know what he was thinking. She knew the moment she'd consented to come to the lake with him. The pull was strong. What would his parents think about what he wanted to do? He grimaced. What would his preacher think about it? Though he wanted her something powerful, he was in no hurry. Actually, he was enjoying the anticipation. 3 years he'd been celibate. No one had captured his interest until now. She came back to the truck and pulled her skirt loose again and took the beer he offered and slid up onto the tailgate to sit beside him. The water cold? Not too bad, she said, tipping her bottle up to drink. Do you know any of those people? She asked, squinting to see across the lake. Probably. You want to go see? Sure. Beer in hand, they walked around the lakeside. You have your phone on you? Chaz asked. No, I left it in my purse back in the truck. Why? Do you need it? No, you need it. For what? You need to call Maddie and tell her not to worry. Tell her you'll be home late. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out his phone, pulled up Maddie and his contacts, and handed the phone to her. Lisa's brows knit. It's weird, you know. I'm not used to having anyone actually care where I am or if I'm okay. His hand brushed across her shoulders. Well, Miss Maddie cares. Lisa. And Joe. He looked down at her and pulled her close as they walked. And me. She smiled up at him as she hit the call button and then spoke to her grandmother. As they neared the raucous crowd, Chaz waved. Well, in answer to your question, I do know some of these people. Most of them. As he spoke, Cindy came running up. Chaz, Lisa, hey, what are you doing here? We're just spending some time together. What about you, sis? She laughed. Just having some fun. With who? Don't go getting all brotherly on me, Chaz. I wouldn't. I would let you just go about your business if I didn't smell alcohol on your breath. No way. Do you think I'm stupid? Lisa tugged on his hand. Come on, Chaz. If she had a drink, I bet she won't the rest of the night. Will you, Cindy? Absolutely not, she said. I promise. See that you don't. I don't want to have to kill some poor kid because he took advantage of you while you were illegally drunk. I promise, Chaz. Not another drop. She gave Lisa a hug. Thanks, Lisa. You're totally cool in my book. You're welcome. Don't make me regret it. I promise. And this makes us even for saving me the other night. Absolutely, Cindy said with a grin as she hurried off to join her friends. They watched her run off. There were several other young couples partying. Some played in the water, some lay on blankets, drinking beer, some tossed a frisbee, and some roasted marshmallows at the fire. Chaz smiled at her. You want to roast a marshmallow? She smiled, shrugging her shoulders. Well, believe it or not, I've never roasted a marshmallow. You're kidding. When she only frowned, he ushered her over toward the fire, where they were immediately offered sticks and marshmallows. Chaz watched Lisa as she tried to roast her marshmallow, carefully turning the stick so it would brown evenly on all sides. And at one point, however, she accidentally got it too close to the heat and it caught fire. Oh, oh, she cried, jumping back quickly, her cheeks puffing out as she blew out the flame. She looked over at Chaz with an adorable pout on her face. It's okay, you can eat it anyway, it still tastes good. She pulled the sticky blob from her stick and tried to stuff the whole thing into her mouth, laughing when half of it dropped down onto her chest. Using her finger, she scooped it up and sucked, and Chaz swallowed hard. He took her down to the water to help her wash her hands and let her dry them on his shirt. Come on, let's go back to our side. It's quieter. He held her hand as they walked. His mind had strayed to the future, and he couldn't help but wonder about his and Lisa's and what it would be. So, what are you going to do? He asked. About what? I mean, are you going to get a job, go to school, learn a foreign language? She chuckled. Well, I haven't spoken to Grams about this yet, but I have big plans. She looked up at him slyly. And some of the plans include you. She had his interest. Really? Like what? Okay, just listen. Don't say anything until I'm finished. Cross my heart, Chaz promised, loving how her eyes sparkled with excitement. Well, Grams wants to cook. She wants to cook for a lot of people, and she wants to teach others how to cook. So I have this big plan to turn the farmhouse into a fabulous, high-end little inn. At his shocked look, she held her hand up and went on quickly. Cooking lessons will be part of the package. That will make Grams happy, and she'll run around the inn's kitchen, create the menu. She'll run the inn's kitchen, create the menu, etc. I'll do some refurbishing of the place. We'll employ a few good people, and we'll be off and running. And where do I come in? Well, with the right advertising, I'll be able to get people to come to a nice, soothing, old-fashioned farmhouse for rest and relaxation, and for a slice of hometown Americana, and to learn some cooking skills. But I need a bigger hook, something for the men. So I thought, what about your ranch? What about letting people take an active part in running a ranch? People who spend all their time working in the city could have quite an adventure. Running a ranch? You mean like a dude ranch? Well, yes and no. Not really a dude ranch because you wouldn't be involved in finding activities for the tourists, only providing opportunities for those who wish to see how you work, maybe even help. There will only be a few people. Your ranch will run like it always does. Only you will allow people to ride with you, watch how it's done, see what it's like to run a ranch full of killer cows. That will seem like heaven to city people who run in the rat race every day. He smiled. So, when were you going to approach me about this if I hadn't asked? I was going to wait until I had a proposal drawn up and give you some decent demographics and statistics to look at and give you a better overall view of the plan. He was smiling like the Cheshire Cat. What? I'm realizing I've just met the vice president of Golden Hotels. She blushed. I really have put a lot of thought into it. It will bring revenue to the town. Joe could expand. Some of the town folk could open country-type markets, produce stands, craft and hobby venues. From spring to fall, the town would really benefit. And then in the winter, some may come if only to sit in front of a roaring fire. The town could put on a Christmas pageant. Again, have venues with Christmas-type items, a country Christmas sort of theme. I'm very serious about this. I've run a conglomerate of hotels. I know I can make one little country inn work. He squeezed her hand. I'm terribly impressed. And I have no doubt that you can make it work, but what does Miss Maddie have to say? Well, she actually doesn't know yet. I'm going to speak with her about it tomorrow. They arrived back at the truck, and Chaz jumped up into the bed of the truck and sat down, leaning his back against the back window. Lisa pulled 2 more beers from the cooler, handed one to him, and joined him. So, what do you think about your part in my plans? Lips pressed together, he nodded. It sounds doable. Of course, I'd have to speak with my father about it and make sure we won't be liable for anything. That can all be worked out satisfactorily, I believe. During the lull in the conversation, she looked up into the sky. One by one, as the sky grew darker, the tiny lights blinked on. She scanned the sky, counting only 5 stars, and then after a few seconds scanned again and counted 13. Chaz's arm came around her. Are you really counting stars? She smiled up at him. I'm just seeing how many more there are as the sky gets darker and darker. Does that seem silly? Not at all. I love to look up at the night sky. The universe is so amazing, and we know so very little about it, really. In Los Angeles, you can barely see any stars at all, but when I was driving across the country, there were times at night when I could have turned off my headlights. The moon and stars were so bright. In Iraq, I would look up at the sky and wonder if there were any stars, maybe some way off on the edge of the night sky that I was looking at that maybe could have been seen by this part of the world. He realized he'd been thinking about Carrie during those times in Iraq and blew out a breath. Carrie was gone now. He had to move on. He hadn't wanted to for a very long time, but Lisa made him want to live again. and to feel again, and to love again. Come here, he said, patting the space between his legs. He pulled her over to sit between his thighs, her back against his chest, and wrapped his arms around her. That feels good. Warm. Were you cold? Maybe a little chilled. She wriggled her backside against him, trying to get closer to the warmth, and felt his arms tighten. Oh, girl, he whispered into her ear. Be still. His mouth moved over her cheek, then lower to taste her neck. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to simply experience it. Finally, she turned her head slightly to the side so she could look up at him. He kissed her deeply, slowly, passionately, until he had her moaning, and still he didn't relinquish the kiss. When he finally did take his lips from hers, she protested, raising her arms above her head and taking hold of him on either side of his face and pulling him right back down to her. Lisa felt safely enclosed in a warm, dark cocoon of sensuality, wrapped in Chaz's strong arms and held captive by his kiss, experiencing sensations that overwhelmed her. How was this possible? How could he make her feel so much, yet he wasn't even touching her? She was fully clothed, yet felt the vulnerability of giving herself over completely to his care. She pulled away from him and stood. Where are you going? He asked, looking up at her. Right here. She turned to face him and sat back down. Chaz watched her face as she sat on his lap, her slim, athletic legs on either side of his hips, her eyes closed, her head tilted back. Reaching up, he pulled the clips that held her hair up on the sides. The sea of red shimmered down against her cheeks. Her eyes opened and she smiled sweetly, and his heart slammed into his ribs. He tried to understand what was happening to him. He hadn't felt anything for years. He'd been numb. He thought that was how the rest of his life would be. But this fiery redhead came bursting into the scene, and everything changed. Now it was all he could do to keep from taking her right here and now. He knew better. He was not thinking the thoughts that a Christian man should be thinking. What would happen if he were to make love to her tonight, right here in the back of a truck? How would she feel about that? And when it was over, how would he feel? Making love to this amazing woman, it should be more special than a quick go in the back of a pickup truck. This woman was not just any woman. She was special, and perhaps the only key to his ever being happy again. She is a gift, he realized, a gift from God, and he should be treating her with reverence and not like trash. Quickly, he pushed her off his lap, turned her around, and pulled her up close to his side. She gave a little mewl of disappointment, so he raised her chin with his hand and kissed her over and over until she forgot the disappointment. They sat quietly for several minutes. What are you thinking about? He finally asked. She smiled. Actually, I was thinking about Glenn. He turned his head. Tell me you're kidding. She giggled. I'm not kidding, but believe me, it's not a slight to you or your manhood in any way. It's just the opposite. I was thinking about how selfish he is, how he never made me feel the way you do. I'm realizing it was because he didn't care. How I felt, whether or not I was enjoying our time together, it wasn't important, not to him. She shrugged. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too harsh. Maybe he just didn't know. Maybe he thought I felt the same things he felt. Trust me, he didn't think that. How do you know? Because a man knows. She sighed. I'm just being here with you, sitting beside you, touching your hand, she said, lifting their joint hands up. She turned her head toward him. Kissing you, it's like realizing there's a whole new world out there, one I didn't have access to. He smiled. I want to take you there. She snuggled up closer. So, Chaz began, drinking beer and making out in the bed of a pickup out under the stars on a Saturday night. That's about as country as you can get. Are you still glad you've connected with your southern roots? Absolutely, she purred. They were quiet until she tugged on his hand. Lay down flat beside me so I can look at the stars without straining my neck. She slid down, put his arm out so she could lay her head on it. They watched the stars, trying to name the constellations, until she shivered. He rolled toward her, using his body to warm her. That feels good. I was getting chilled. Let me see if I can warm you up. Their lips met, and they sunk quickly and deeply into the warm oasis of bliss. The fire started to build. Chaz had no intention to do anything more than cuddle. He gave himself over to it, delighted to be experiencing feelings he never thought to have again. He thought this part of his life was over. Then this woman appeared and everything changed. He was in love with her. He truly was. He admitted. The thought was accompanied by a small slice of guilt, but he pushed it out of his mind. He pulled away just slightly to gaze at her. Her eyes looked into his, those green, green eyes. No, no, they looked brown tonight. His heart skipped a beat, and he shook his head and blinked hard, and they became green once more. He kissed her again, and she gave a soft moan. She did that whenever it was a long, slow kiss. He smiled. That was intimate information. Carrie had always said to have intimate information about someone was like owning their soul. Carrie. No, stop it. Can't think about Carrie. Not now. Please, not now. He looked at Lisa's face again, afraid of what he might see, but she was there, smiling. She spoke his name, and he looked at her. Could see her silky brown hair, her big brown doe-like eyes, and blood seeped out of her forehead and ran down her face. No, God, please, no. He trembled. His world turned upside down and inside out. Nausea swept over him, and he withdrew into himself, sat up quickly, and turned away. Silence. It enveloped them. It seemed the entire world stood still, and then Lisa's hand gently touched his back. Chaz? What's wrong? What's the matter? He drew a breath to steady himself and blew it out slowly. I need to get you home. But she stopped herself as she recognized the brusqueness of his tone. Okay. She sat up, adjusted her clothing. What had happened? What had she done? She crossed her arms over her body in a protective gesture, suddenly feeling ashamed and self-conscious. He glanced back at her before he jumped over the side of the truck and moved to the front. Leaning against the hood, he stared out into the woods that surrounded Wilson's Lake. All was quiet now. The kids across the way had moved on, and figuratively, so had Chaz's heart. It was silent now, too. He'd been so happy to find love again, to find life again. But he'd just been shown that it wasn't meant to be. Not for him. He'd had his one chance at happiness and had it ripped away. Apparently, he had no right to love again. He was damaged goods, not fit for anyone, especially not someone like Lisa, who was so full of energy and passion. How could he have a relationship with her? From now on, he would be terrified of being intimate with her in any way, terrified of what he would see. What kind of man is that? Not a man at all. There was no getting past it, was there? Heaven knows he tried. Post-traumatic stress, they say. Counseling hadn't done anything to help. The dreams, the flashbacks, the physical symptoms, they were tearing him apart. It's a wonder he could function at all. No way could he tell Lisa that he'd just kissed his wife vicariously through her. And he hadn't meant to. Carrie was dead. He knew that. He understood that. He accepted that. Life goes on. That's what everyone keeps saying. And recently, for a brief time, he began to believe that it could. He was in love with Lisa Lewis. He cared for her. He liked her. He needed her. He wanted her. But it doesn't seem to matter what he wants. He was a broken man. All the king's horses and all the king's men. He sighed. If he told Lisa about the accident, she would be sweet and compassionate and understanding, and she would say it's okay. She'd tell him they'd work through it, and then 10 years down the road, when she's been beaten down and unfulfilled and yearning for something he couldn't give, she'd finally give up on him. It would be a tidy split, no ugliness. Lisa would want to avoid that. Nevertheless, she'd regret the years that she'd thrown away on him, the youth she'd let slip through her fingers. He looked back at her. She was upset. He'd hurt her. He didn't want to. He loved her. He loved her enough to end the relationship now. She'll think he's a real piece of work, put him in the same category with Glenn, and she'll think he toyed with her and led her on, and his heart broke. It had to be done. Are you ready to go home? He asked, turning abruptly. Her chin quivered. Her eyes were open wide with pain. He didn't know if she'd fallen in love with him like he had with her, but he did know there were strong feelings on her part, which is all the more reason to end it now. He folded the quilt from the back of the truck and placed it in the passenger side, then grabbed the cooler and placed it in his SUV. She slid behind the wheel of her truck and closed the door quietly, staring out toward the dark woods. He leaned in the window. Follow me out. I'll lead you home. Chaz, she said softly, her voice quavering. Will you talk to me a minute? I just want to know. I'm really tired, Lisa. I'm sure you are too. Just follow me. Her mouth shut. He turned away to avoid seeing one of the tears that were in her eyes spill over. Coward. Such a coward. He climbed into his vehicle and slammed the door and gunned the engine. He had to force himself to drive slowly so she could keep up. At the house, he pulled into the drive and watched as she parked her new truck. She never looked his way as she made her way inside. The front door closed and a light came on. He sighed, hoping she'd be okay. He knew Miss Mattie would take good care of her. He sped off, gravel flying. Did he have any other choice? It was obvious to him that the flashbacks would never stop. Never. The accompanying nausea and disorientation were physically devastating. Lisa was young and vibrant, a true sexual being. She needed a man, a real man, not someone who couldn't differentiate between her and a freaking corpse. He slammed his fist on the steering wheel, pulled up in front of his lonely little house, and stared at the dark windows. There was no light inside his house and none inside his heart. He was a prisoner of his own mind, and there was no escaping. And that is the end of chapter 8.